any rate, succession was more or less assured because Ayatollah Khamenei was a very charismatic figure and he had very legitimate religious credentials. He chose, initially he had a Grand Ayatollah, Hussein Ali Montazeri, but last minute, a couple months before, there was actually an internal issue. Montazeri was cast aside. So you had Ali Khamenei, who's the current supreme leader, come into power in 1989. Why was Ali Khamenei chosen? He was chosen because he was relatively weak, because he was relatively colorless, and was the compromise candidate among all the different factions. He never had the religious credentials which Khomeini had. Now, in Shia Islam, you have a hierarchy that's not unlike the hierarchy in Roman Catholicism, where in Roman Catholicism, of course, you have the Pope, you have the College of Cardinals, you have the archbishops, you have the bishops. In Shiism, you have at the top what's called the Marja at-Taqlid, the source of emulation. And then you have the Grand Ayatollahs, the Hujjat al-Islams, the Mujtahids, all the way down. The difference is that while through most parts of history, Roman Catholics agree on a single pope, in Shiism, you choose who your personal pope will be, who your Marja at-Taqlid will be from among the top Ayatollahs. It's an individual choice. Now, today, it's Ali Sistani, who's a name some of you probably heard, who lives in Najaf in Iraq. Actually an Iranian, but lives in Najaf in Iraq, and he's the one to whom most people see as, if you will, the Shiite Pope. Now, what a lot of people forget is in 1994, the former Marja at-Taqlid, the former Shiite Pope was a guy named Araki, A-R-A-K-I. He died at age 104. And Ali Khamenei, who was just in power in Iran for 5 years at that time, came forward and said, I am the Marja at-Taqlid, I am the source of emulation. And basically he was laughed off the stage. And within days, he actually had to retract his claim to this sort of religious legitimacy. The point here is, he doesn't have the religious legitimacy people in the past had. So you've got a situation. Will anyone really care if he points to someone and says, this person is going to be my successor? And if you can't assure a successor, then what happens in Iran? I'll dance around this a little bit, but I would argue that Iran, just as no one a decade ago thought that Syria could descend into civil war, there's a real possibility that Iran could as well during succession. Just one thing. When you're the supreme leader of Iran, you claim the ultimate political and religious authority. And you're not, technically, Khomeini was the deputy of the Messiah on earth. That's how he justified his legitimacy. And Khamenei tries to do this, but again, he can't. If we go back to the Iraq War, one of the first things that we had to worry about religiously as Americans occupying Iraq, and I'll put the politics and the debate aside about whether we should have done it or not, was something called Arba'in, which is a holiday which marks the 40th day anniversary of Ashura, which is itself the anniversary of the martyrdom of one of the major Shiite figures, a guy named Imam Hussein. Now, traditionally, Shiites mark this holiday by marching from Baghdad to Karbala and Najaf. And so from a US Army perspective, we needed to secure the march, because this was the first time they could do this since Saddam Hussein had prevented it. We had to secure potentially 2 million people walking between Baghdad and the holy Shiite cities of Najaf and Karbala in Iraq. Now here's the thing. One of the basic questions is, when is Arba'in? Now think about it. In Christianity, we use a solar calendar, and so it's easy to know when all the holidays are. But Islam uses a lunar calendar, much like Judaism. And that means that the months begin with the sighting of the new moon. Now in Shiism, it's the Ayatollahs who cite the new moon. So you don't actually know when a holiday is going to be until the Ayatollah tells you when the new moon has been. Well, you had some Iranian journalists ask Khamenei, when is Arba'in? And he said, it's going to be Wednesday. But for the first time, because Saddam Hussein was gone, you had the same journalists be able to ask Sistani and Najaf. And he said, that's easy, it's Tuesday. Well, how the heck can you be the supreme leader of Iran with ultimate political and religious authority and be contradicted by another Ayatollah? And so this is one of the reasons, a major reason I would say, why you actually have the Iranian-backed Shiite militias. It's not all about killing Americans, although that was part of it. It's more about constraining the debate in Iraq to ensure that no one contradicts the supreme leader in Iran. Now, it's all well and good, but there's a crisis of legitimacy here. Because what happens if you're an individual and you're picking your personal pope? You're picking your Shiite marja at-taqlid. The way it works religiously is there's some rules. You have to follow someone who's living, and then in exchange for their religious guidance, you have to pick a single person, no a la carte theology. You can't say, I like what this person says about women, I like what this person says about property, I like what this person says about the economy. You pick one person, and you follow them, and in exchange, you pay them a religious duty, a teeth. And the pattern is, whoever gets the most money tends to amplify their influence because they can hire the most, they can sponsor the most mosques, they can take the most seminary students, they can have the most soup kitchens. And so when we look at this, and the way as an analyst, when I'm talking, and there's no way to do this really scientifically, a lot of it is just anecdotally talking to taxi drivers, that sort of thing, talking in markets, drinking tea with people. Who do you pay your khums to? Who do you pay your religious teeth to? And what we find out is, I mean, most Iraqis, and this is no secret, pay it to Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani. What's interesting is most Iranians pay it to Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani. So again, you have a supreme leader in Iran who claims ultimate political and religious authority, but most Iranians, if voting with their wallets, choose someone else. Now, let's get back to the succession. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is 82 years old. Back in, I believe, 1981, he survived an assassination attempt which has left him partially paralyzed. Then about 5 years ago, he had prostate cancer. And we know this because he actually tweeted out pictures of himself being treated for prostate cancer. And then, of course, you had COVID and so forth, and you had a lot of his peers who have died over the years. I mean, Ali Valiati, and not actually Valiati, Ali Akbar Hashmi Rafsanjani, the former president from the Iran-Contra days, who's best known among them. At any rate, people are openly talking about succession. So you've got a situation, what happens when the supreme leader dies? There's a theory and there's the reality. The theory is there's an 88-member body called the Assembly of Experts, a clerical body, and they choose the new supreme leader. But we know from the only time this has happened in history that there's a lot of backroom maneuvering and that really they're just a coffee klatch and a rubber stamp body. Now, one thing, I have very little patience often talking to diplomats because, I mean, I want to get to the point, and so I often talk to people in the intelligence community more, and I'm not just talking to the US intelligence community, but actually across the region. One of the things that the Omani intelligence community and the Bahraini intelligence community have both separately pointed out to me is when the Sultan of Oman died last year or 2 years ago, there's a mechanism by which a new sultan, and of course, you know, the sultan was gay, he didn't have any children, so there was a question about his succession. According to Omani law, they had to pick, a council needed to pick a new successor within 48 hours. If they couldn't come to a consensus within 24 hours, the Sultan, Sultan Qaboos, was going to leave a letter which would be unsealed, which would help guide the discussion. What the Omanis and the Bahrainis point out is in the Iranian constitution and in Iranian law, It says that you have to have a succession go through the Assembly of Experts. But what happens if the Assembly of Experts never meets? What happens if since there's no formal timeline associated with this? And what complications could occur? One of the other complications, by the way, is that nothing says that the supreme leader has to be one person. It could be a council of people. Now, one of the elements that I worry most about in the region is the Islam, and don't worry, I won't just talk about Iran, is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the difference between the regular Iranian army and the Revolutionary Guards is that the regular army is charged with territorial defense. The Revolutionary Guards are charged with defense of the revolution, which means that the enemies can be either external or internal. I'm going to make another tangent right now. One of the things that, we often talk in our debates, policy debates, and in the intelligence community about what we know about a country like Iran. After 43 years, I just want to list a few things which we don't know about Iran. First of all, we talk about the difference between so-called hardliners and reformers, but that's in the political sphere. What are the factional divisions within the Revolutionary Guard? That's one big mystery. Second of all, in 2007, the Iranians discovered, this is against the backdrop of a lot of unrest and protests, that there could actually be, that the greatest threat to Iran's stability was going to be internal because Saddam Hussein was dead, the Taliban were pushed back, the Israelis were paper tigers, I'm quoting the Iranians now, and quote unquote, the Americans can't do a damn thing. Therefore, what the Iranians did was put one Revolutionary Guard unit in each of the provinces of Iran. Here's something else we don't know. Are those units staffed by people native to the provinces in which they serve? If they are native to the provinces in which they serve, that's an indication that ideology trumps kinship if given the order to fire on crowds in the street. If they're rotated around the country and they're not able to serve in their home provinces, that's an indication that even the Supreme Leader and the Revolutionary Guards don't trust people to necessarily fire on the crowds. So that's another unknown we have in Iran.